This happened so many years ago. I was in the third or fourth grade in the early 1980s. I lived in a very rural area with many small towns surrounded by woods. On this day, I was so excited to have permission from my parents to go directly home from school with a friend on her bus. Side note, my parents both worked long hours, unlike so many of my friends that had stay-at-home moms at the time. I was normally a latchkey kid. So anyway, I was going to go home with my friend on her bus for the very first time. I even had a nice note from my mom about my trip home with my friend to hand to the bus driver after we got on the bus. I was super excited because my friend really lived in the woods. I had gone to her birthday party over the summer and we had collected fireflies and slept in an actual tent. This was so cool to me because I lived close to the town center and didn't even have a tent. So here we are on her bus. We sat in the middle at first, and then slowly moved up towards the front of the bus as kids got off. My friend lived just before the town line on a road that headed out of town, so hers was the last stop. Towards the end of the ride, we were right up front behind the bus driver who played some awesome tunes via the popular radio station WAAF. My friend, who is a bit of an odd little duck, was bopping to the beat of the song on the radio, while I was just looking out the front of the window of the bus directly behind the driver. Just then, the driver turned his head to me and said, "Hey, what would you girls do if I didn't drop you off?" I was instantly spooked and looked towards my friend, who was still bopping away to the song. What? I stammered. I was not used to talking to adults I didn't know, but I knew what I had heard. "Oh, nothing," he replied. He was just pulling up to my friend's stop and just pulled over and let us out. I have thought about this many times over the years, wondering why he would have said that. Then I wonder, what if my friend's mom wasn't home? Would he have even stopped, or would he have driven us out into the middle of nowhere? Also, since this was her everyday bus, why wasn't that creep a worry for my friend? I have since gone on to grow up and raise kids in the same area, but I can't help to think about why this bus driver picked that day to get all weird. I never told any adult as I was a kid, and after we got off the bus it was no longer my worry. But yeah, creepy bus driver, let's not meet again. This happened back in the summer of 2006. I was 15 at the time and grew up in a small town in Washington with nothing to do. My friends and I would often go to a small lake that was surrounded by a hiking trail, with paved parking, barbecue areas, and things like that. On the opposite side of the lake, and accessible by the trail, there was a popular swimming hole with one spot in particular that offered a cliff probably 10 feet above the water that offered a fun plunge. One Saturday, my friends were out of town, but I was very close to my youth pastor and his girlfriend. I'll just call her Kay. She was probably around 20 at the time and was a great mentor to us teenagers, so I really enjoyed spending time with her. She was outdoorsy and invited me there to go swimming that day, so off we went. Everything was fine and dandy, a quiet day. Water was dirty but felt like a good respite from the heat. It was just the two of us there at the swimming hole. We were swimming around this spot on the opposite side of the lake, just the two of us, laughing and chatting. I'll never forget it, but all of a sudden I had an incredible twisting feeling in my stomach, and my hearing and vision seemed to oddly sharpen immediately. I stood perfectly upright on my feet in the shallow water, doubled over and grasping my chest. Within 5 seconds of seeing this happen, Kay could tell something was wrong with me, and we both went completely silent and still as I looked at her, confused. In our brief silence, we could faintly hear 3 men talking nearby. We couldn't see anything as the swimming hole was around a bend, but saw ripples in the water. A boat was approaching. My chest immediately relaxed, and I quietly took in a deep breath and stared at Kristen while we both stopped swimming to listen closely. Then, clear as day, we both heard them claim which one of us they each intended to keep once they caught us. "She's a blonde and I'm a brunette," while another told them to be quiet. The water carried their voices and they didn't realize it. We heard their plans for brutality. Kay and I had a direct eye contact during this 15-second or so experience, at which point she put her finger up to say, "Shh," and pointed frantically at the side of the cliff to climb back up. I've never moved so quietly and quickly in my life. Within 30 seconds, we had climbed our way back up to the top of the cliff. The moment we hit the top, we saw a boat come around the bend looking for us. I don't know what or who she saw, but she gave me another shh. We walked away quickly from our shoes and picnic lunch, and I left them there among the trees. Within 30 seconds, away from the shoreline, we full-on bolted barefoot around the perimeter of the lake. Because the trail was within 30 feet of the lake, all the way back to the wreck area, we could hear them start their engine and go around the water, yelling to each other, trying to figure out where we went. We were in flight mode, ran straight for 10 minutes back to her car, darting on and off of the trail to avoid being seen at the waterline. We jumped into her car and whipped out of there as fast as possible. The parking lot was empty, but luckily they thought we were still at the swimming hole. We could see their boat whizzing around from the parking area as we sped away, shaking and in tears. There was no one around but us and them, and no cell service because it was secluded. The drive back to my house was only 20 minutes, but felt like hours. The rest of the day was a blur, but I do remember her trying to explain something to a 911 operator once we had a signal again. The way her hand shook with her cell phone, dropping it more than once while on the line with the operator and wiping blood off my feet. The lake is still a popular spot for both locals and visitors, so scary lake guys, let's not ever meet. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband go out of town. They have a teenage daughter. Let's just say her name is Alyssa. At like 3 a.m., I'm woken up by a weird rustling sound, and I look out the window and I see movement. A boy emerges from the bushes on the side of the house. I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was it was a burglar casing houses, but since he looked young and came through on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. Didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops right away. So I went in on the porch and I flipped the lights on and said, "Can I help you?" in my most classroom voice. The guy looked surprised but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman jacket, but once I got a clear view of him in the streetlight, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, gruff, and way more wiry than athletic. He walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping he'd realize he came looking for a girl late at night and instead found a grumpy old person. I'm thinking what must have happened is Alyssa knew her parents were going out of town, and maybe before she knew I'd be staying over, told a secret older boyfriend to come by. It was late, and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird he came so late, and I wanted to make sure Alyssa actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Alyssa, you know, Alyssa, last name. This is her house." I thought, if he knew her full name, they must at least be friends. I said, "You wait here." He started to walk up, and I felt sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in, and I yelled, "No, stop, freeze." Then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. You wait there." So I go in, and Alyssa is asleep just one room over from where the wrestling first occurred, and I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know what the big idea was to have friends over this time of night, but you tell them to go home." She has no clue what I'm talking about. I say, "There's a guy outside asking for you." Confused, she gets up and goes to the window. She sees him and goes white as a sheet. "He asked for me?" "Yeah." "By name?" "Yes." "Call the police. I've never seen him before in my life." I called 911 immediately, but as I was on the phone with them, Alyssa started tugging at my arm. "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it just open enough for the latch and yelled, "I asked my husband, and none of us know an Alyssa last name. Leave my property or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and when he heard the sirens, he grabbed the bike and ran off. I watched where he was running, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights or front plates, and it sped off. The police followed in the same direction once I pointed them in the way. But they didn't get him. They advised us to take all her social media details offline if she was sure she didn't know this person, and said they'd had a couple similar reports recently and that they were still looking into it. I got a heavy-duty lock, and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit.